Well, hello and good evening to all of my parenting and award tribe out there. This is Alicia. I'm coming to you today because I wanted to continue a discussion I'd had a number of months ago with a mental health therapist focused on adults. And so I've had conversation with friends and family that touch on the subject of children and how important it is for kids to also be well physically, mentally, and emotionally. And so I wanted to bring that subject with an expert in that area, focusing on the youth. And before I get started, though, just to take a step back, as many of you know, this channel is really geared towards helping our families to thrive in a different world that we find ourselves in. And so as Black families, we're often thinking about resources for ourselves and our children to make sure that we can live the best lives that we have. And so, as a part of that work, in addition to sharing the experiences that I have, I like to bring on experts to talk about various topics that are important for us in our communities. And so, as I said before, tagging on to another conversation I had a while back, I'm bringing on Mrs. Zena Chase, who is a licensed clinical mental health counselor. And I'm really excited to talk to her about her work that really touches on families as a whole, but more importantly, some of the work she does with youth. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Zena, to say a little bit about yourself and your practice.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's an honor. So yes, I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor, and I see all ages. Originally, I'd say I started around age 3 with my clients, and they go all the way up to 99. I see a lot of different populations. So I see everything from neurodivergence to behavioral issues, to anxiety, depression, suicidal ideations, chronic suicidality, family therapy, substance use, you name it, eating disorders. I do it. Yeah, so I see a little bit of everybody, and I work, like she said, with youth, a lot of family work, and a lot of adults as well that fit into that equation because us helping the youth, we have to get their parents on board as well to really kind of close that gap.
Absolutely. And can you confirm again what the ages are for children or youth that you serve?
3 and up.
Oh, 3 and up. Okay. And so because that's such a wide range, we'll probably get into, if there are different modalities you use. But just to even think about it from the beginning parts, what are some of those key signs or indicators you would say parents may notice or start to look out for that could potentially prompt them to think about, do I need to get some specialty services for our children? So are there things that, let's say if you're dealing with a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old, that might be things that a parent is like, is this a rambunctious kid or is there more going on here?
Hmm. Absolutely. So I think a good way to look at it, regardless of age across the board, a way to sum it up is any change in behavior is what I typically tell parents to look out for. I think as parents, we know our children, we know their behaviors, we know their personalities. We know a lot about them in general. We spend the most time with them, outside of their teachers, of course. Um, but any change in behavior is usually significant, and that change in behavior can be very subtle. It can be them starting to skip certain meals. It can be them, um, I guess, deviating from the type of shows or television shows or friend groups that they have and switching over to different crowds. It can be them isolating themselves even more or them being more angry than usual. It could be their grades falling in school. So I like to look at it and say a good way to kind of navigate or gauge it is just any change in behavior, any change in their normal routines or patterns that you don't typically see.
Got it. And would it be something that you would say if it's over a sustained amount of time, or is it, even the first few occurrences, if things seem really drastic, that there might be something for them to consider?
Correct. So typically I say any change because typically a change that's noticeable will already be happening for, let's say a couple weeks usually before parents are really starting to like, this is new. We don't usually get this from you. What's going on? So I think if it's noticeable, it's probably been going on a little bit longer than, you know, you've noticed. So I would jump right into it. I think it's very important for parents to also accept that most times their kids won't come to them with issues. regardless of, how close you guys are, how good the relationship is. Um, the reality is a lot of times children just don't like to talk to their parents for whatever reason. So they may talk to other people. It may be other family members. It may be peers. It may be teachers. It could be the neighbor. Just someone that they trust. Hopefully they're talking. And if not, sometimes they just isolate and don't talk to anyone about what's going on because they don't know how. I think I find a lot in therapy that a lot of children specifically don't necessarily know if things are right versus wrong. Um, I would say something that I see a lot of that causes significant changes in their mental health is bullying. I think people don't take bullying as serious as they should. Schools, in particular, they definitely don't take it as serious as they should. So, parents, I think that if your child does come to you and say that they've experienced some sort of bullying, or they may just say, I don't want to wear this anymore, or I don't like this anymore, or these shoes are, ugly, or I don't want to wear my hair like this anymore, or I hate this shirt. Anything could be like indicative of some type of bullying, and I think that parents have to pay a lot more attention to it. I think most people somewhat brush it off sometimes and say, hey, you need tougher skin, or you should say things back, or you should just ignore them. Which doesn't always work, So I think kids these days, especially if you say, hey, just ignore them, it will get worse. And not only will it get worse, other people will also get on board because everybody wants to be in the in crowd. So it's like when they isolate and, kick someone out and they're in the out crowd or
Mhm.
they're determined to be different, other people kind of jump on that bandwagon of let me also jump in on this so I can be in a popular group, the popular crowd.
Well, I mean, and when you say that, I think for many of us having school age kids now, it will probably take a beat for people like, wait a minute, because I know I have a 7-year old. And when you said that sort of thing where her style is changed, where she will not wear certain things, I mean, like tears if I
Mhm.
am trying to push her. And now that you're saying that, is there something that parents in cases like that can do because I'm just like because I've said like you can be your individual self and all of that, and that doesn't seem to resonate with her. So at that
Right.
point, because again, like we could be contributing to a problem, is there a way for us to probe to get at is this a bigger issue than what we're thinking it is?
Right. So I would say definitely try and talk to your child first, see how much they open up and listen to them. Like a lot of
Mhm.
times with children, when they come to therapy, before it gets really severe, they just have people around them that aren't necessarily listening to them because of their age. So sometimes it's like, yeah, I've been 7 before, I've been 10 before, it'll be fine. You'll get
But
over
not
it.
like this, not in this
Exactly.
era.
Exactly. So it's a lot more serious than people believe it to be at this age. Children have a lot of access to things that older generations did not have access to. They're on the internet every day. They go on the internet for homework. They have social media. They see it on TV, a lot of different things. So they're exposed to a lot more just images and populations that they wouldn't have been otherwise. So when they are being teased or they say, "Hey, I don't want to wear this," it's usually because something's behind it. So I would say
Mhm.
probe them a little bit more and just listen to them. If they say, "Hey, I don't want to wear skirts anymore," I would say, you know, listen to them and maybe not
Mhm.
let them wear skirts anymore. Okay, fine. If
Mhm.
you want to talk to me and tell me why you don't want to wear skirts anymore, you can talk to me, but don't push them too much because you don't want to push them so far that they isolate even further. Because that, like I said, they may not want to open up to you or may not be comfortable opening up to you. So sometimes I would say just listen to them, and if they say, "Hey, I don't want to wear skirts," because I've seen cases where, let's say a girl in particular that I had, she didn't want to wear skirts anymore either, and it was because she had been sexually assaulted.
Oh my gosh.
And of course, our parents, no, you got to wear what we buy. You got to do what we say. And I'm like, you missed this. And then I have another child who started layering up a lot, just layers of
Trying to
clothes.
hide.
Layers of
Mm.
clothing. Wasn't bathing, wasn't showering, and the teachers actually noticed. So the teachers are calling home and they're saying, hey, your kid's being teased and bullied because they have hygiene issues. You need to make them bathe, or um, and it went on and on and on. And the kids, they teased her. it wasn't a lot done about the teasing at the school. And the girl isolated even further, and to come to find out, she was actually being sexually abused by a parent. So there are so many different things that you can pick up on if you really just kind of pay attention and listen to them and not just brush things off as, oh, they're just a teenager, they don't want to do this, or because sometimes there's heavy things behind it. I wouldn't say all the time, but I would say most of the time there's definitely something behind it. Even something as small as like types of clothing, or you know um I know a lot, I see a lot with self-harming. um Self-harm is a big thing with children as well. It's typically, I say, around 9 to 17, 18 is when it's most active. But if you notice, like, your child only wants to wear long sleeves and long pants, and it's, summertime, it's like, what? Why are you wearing long sleeves and long pants all of a sudden if they didn't used to do that? Now, granted, hoodies are a thing now, so all kids, they wear hoodies. It doesn't matter if it's 90 degrees outside or 20, they want to wear a hoodie. So something like that, it's a trend. I'd be like, okay, I'll give you the benefit of doubt. But if you know your child is usually wearing shorts or short sleeves and all of a sudden they stop, it could be indication of self harm. So um, I guess that's a whole separate topic in itself, because some parents see that and they freak out and think, "Hey, my kid is trying to kill themselves," when in reality, it's not true. Most kids who self harm aren't self harming with the intent to kill themselves or injure themselves. They just want to feel something because they're often numb about something and aren't sure how to express it. Um, so with that, parents just need to be mindful of how they approach the situation and don't try and take the child and have them hospitalized and, start freaking out, but really just try to remember to remain calm and then talk to them and try to get them to open up.
And that's a good point because when you were talking about this, that my question was going to be earlier, but now it seems even more appropriate. What where do parents start if they see these things? Because for a lot of us, if we have not connected into the mental health system, it may be an unknown. And so what is a recommendation for a parent who might be listening who has not explored the mental health dimensions? Where would they start if if they're seeing things that are concerning them and you don't want them to pounce on the child and start asking questions and doing things that might make them feel even more closed or like they're going to close up?
Yeah, yeah. So, of course, I would say start with the child, but also, you know, with adults, therapists offer consultations. Like every therapist, if you're trying to find a therapist, they offer at minimal like a 10-15 minute free consultation call.
Mhm.
You can call any therapist and say, hey, here's the issue. I don't necessarily know how to handle it. What would you recommend? And that therapist may say, hey, I would recommend, you bring your child to therapy. I would recommend you get a therapist. I would also recommend family therapy, based on just like an individual case. But, giving them the direction, you can definitely start with just calling a therapist. If not there, most schools also have resources for this sort of thing. Um, I wouldn't say all schools have school counselors anymore, but some of them do. So if
Mhm.
your student, or your child has a school counselor, sometimes the school counselors may know and have resources. So reaching out to them, and there's resources out here. Even with costs, I know some people say, I can't afford therapy.
Yeah.
A lot of times, a lot of therapists offer pro bono therapy. And if you call a therapist and say, hey, this is my issue, I'm trying to find pro bono work, or I don't have insurance, but we're willing to pay X amount of money. Either the therapist will let you know, hey, I can help you, or B, at least I can try and find some help for you. So all therapists have access to like listservs and things like that, where we constantly send out messages to like a very broad range of therapists all over, and say, hey, we have a client in this location. This is the issue. They, don't have any insurance. They can't pay this money. So, or they can pay this small amount. Anybody willing to see them? And a lot of people will come and respond and take them.
Right.
I say most therapists typically keep about one or two pro bono cases on their caseload anyway. So just reach out and ask sometimes. Don't let money be like a hindrance to you seeking therapy or trying to get help for your child, because sometimes it can be a life or death situation.
Mhm. Is there a easy to use the word um place to send people like, okay, well, if you're looking for this, maybe start here. Like, is it Psychology Today or Therapy for Black Girls, which we've heard some of those in previous, in the previous interview. But are there places that you recommend for parents that they might want to start their search?
Absolutely. So I would say parents and children. Psychology Today and Therapy for Black Girls are both amazing resources where you can filter out age of the therapist, gender of the therapist, race of the therapist, specialty. So if you want to do, play therapy is something that I do with my younger population. I'd say maybe 11, 12, and under typically will do some form of play therapy. So it will allow you to filter out those specialties. It may be trauma. If your child has just experienced something traumatic, you want to find a therapist that focuses and specializes in trauma
Mhm,
therapy. So it allows you to search based on specialty. You know, you can go bilingual, you can do, like I said, race, age, gender, all those things you can filter out. Location, telehealth, in person. So you can filter all those things on those websites to kind of help you find a therapist. And I also say check with your insurance company. So you can filter with insurance company on both Psychology Today and Therapy for Black Girls as well. But when in doubt, if you call your insurance company and say, "Hey, I need mental health therapists,
mhm.
resources, psychiatrists," they'll email you an entire list that you're
Oh, wow.
in network with,
Mhm,
providers
mhm.
you're in network with.
Now, if you are so we're like, for some of these, if people are talking about their insurance, we may be thinking about employer-based insurance. What about for folks who may be on Medicaid, low-income services? Is it similar in
Mhm.
terms of reaching out to insurance to get that information?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So those websites you can also filter by Medicaid, Medicare. They also do that as well. They have self-pay options. They have slide and scale options that you can filter out
Mhm.
as well. But Medicaid, Medicare, specifically, you can Google that. They have it online. If you Google, Google is amazing these days. So if you Google, therapist near me that takes Medicaid, it'll give you a good idea as well. You can even do child therapist near me that accepts Medicaid, and it'll give you results, as well as calling the insurance company too.
Excellent. Um, and do you link with schools or do you work with parents or is it all of the above as needed?
It's a case by case basis. So I've definitely worked with schools in the past. I wouldn't say we do it with every person, but case by case. So we have some children who may come to therapy for things that are going on in school. So we have, let's say, a 9-year old with chronic SI or depression because they can't seem to navigate just the workload, right? And so we'll have a lot of parents who get upset with the children and like, you're not doing well enough, you're not studying, you're not trying hard enough. When in reality, there are some kids who have like learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities that they aren't aware of if they haven't been tested for them, right? So that's something that I would say certainly for a parent to be mindful of. If your child is struggling in school, you should take them to get psychological testing to see why they are struggling. Because we get many people that get into adulthood who didn't do well in school or didn't finish, or say they feel like failures when they had a intellectual disability the entire time,
Mhm,
and didn't know it. Or they might be dyslexic and didn't know it, so they're not doing well in school, and the parents are just like, "You're not trying hard enough. You're lazy," which again causes anxiety. It causes depression. It can
mhm,
cause suicidal thoughts and feelings. It can cause self-harming. It causes a number of things. So that's important to pay attention to what your child grades looks like. If the child is not doing well, have them tested. So as a therapist, we will work with the school in that case to do an IEP and say, hey, I've noticed that in therapy, even this child is they're only able to focus for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, their mind is wandering, they're skipping subjects, so 10 minutes is their attention span. So then you would work with their teacher, and typically the counselor and some other people at the school to create an IEP for the child that works. So you can just give input. Um, Bullying is another big thing. I've definitely contacted schools, teachers, principals in the past about bullying that wasn't being handled properly.
Yeah.
I'll tell my parents, hey, this is unacceptable. Advocate for your kid. I cannot stress that enough. Advocate, advocate, advocate for your child and yourself as adults as well. You have to advocate for yourself because people will look right past you. They will act like it does not happen. And unfortunately, we have teachers who will witness bullying and say nothing about it. I don't get paid enough for that. That's not my concern. They need to deal with it on their own. And they look past it. So I've seen things like that happen in the past. So you definitely have to advocate for yourself and for your child. And psychological testing as well. If your child is in school, the school offers psychological testing. So talk to them and ask them, hey, my kid is struggling. We need to get on the list for psychological testing.
Now, with that being said, with some of our pre-conversations around this, we're going to talk a little bit in different areas related to this, but stigma. And so if we start with stigma, I think in the Black community, there has traditionally been some reluctance around mental health services and whatever the labels we put onto the reasons why. And I think for a lot of us in the past, if we saw family members who needed services, it was for extreme things, substance use, perhaps very, disorders that required perhaps medication that they weren't getting. So sometimes we saw those types of examples where you couldn't really
Mhm,
put it under the rug and
mhm.
kind of you don't say, oh, they're stressed or anxious, but they're like, there's something that you can see. And because a lot of times in the past, past decades, those were the types of examples where there was that visibility. There are those labels and people are really nervous about, okay, well, I'm not crazy, and that's the word we hear
Mhm.
often. And so if we think about our children and labeling and concerns around that, what would you say to parents who rightfully so are seeing things with their child, likely need to involve the school, but are really reluctant because they're like, I don't want to slap a label on my kid. I don't want them to have to go through, kind of a different trajectory than they
Mhm.
might go if we just act like this wasn't a problem, at least not brought the school system in so that there's this big sticker on their file or whatever parents may think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so with that, I think I push psychoeducation a lot, right? Because there are a lot of parents who do that, especially with neurodivergence, right? Like, I don't want my child to be labeled as a child with autism. It's going to affect X, Y, and Z. And when in reality, it's not. Sometimes having those labels, one, you can have them retested down the line and maybe have it removed, right? Especially when they're early on and they're younger. If you do get testing done and they say, "Hey, your child has autism or your child has this intellectual disability," what it does is it opens up the field of resources for you, right? Especially if they're young. So if you notice that at a young age they're struggling with, like I said, language, any type of fine motor development, any type of milestone development, speech, all those things. If you notice that early on, and you get them tested and they get this label, you get tons of resources. So they'll put you in contact with speech therapists, occupational therapists. They'll give you one-on-one tutors. They'll have teachers come in and take you from the class for 2 or 3 hours and work with you one-on-one to help get them to a point where they need to be so that they can function at their grade level or at their age level. So those resources are very helpful even with IEPs, things like that. You can go to college. Colleges have disability offices as well. So if you have these IEPs and these things to just let people know, hey, I do have a learning disability or some level of an intellectual disability, it does allow for them to have more time. So what you're actually doing is setting them up for success,
Yeah.
right? So if you're giving them more time, if you know that, let's say your 10-year-old has a processing delay, right, with information, if they're giving them an extra hour or so to do tests, or they're giving them an extra week to turn in work, your child will be passing opposed to
Hmm.
failing and being behind.
Hmm. Hmm.
So it just gives them the resources that they need to be able to stay and maintain their grade level and their development level based on their age. And then, like I said, you can drop those at any time. You can have them retested, or even if you don't, they can go to college with these same disabilities and they can still have the same IEP and get the same accommodations in college. So you're actually setting them up for success. So
Thank you.
I just say this
Yeah, and
stigma.
yeah,
You
and I
know?
think because when you think about children with any physical disabilities, we're all over that, like, yes, my child need this and that, but it's
Mhm.
just something, again, that we're working to combat, but it just is a struggle, like, well, are they gonna be slower than everybody else? And are these, adjustments going to, what's the word I've heard from people say, like, is that going to disadvantage them? But you're saying it actually is gonna support them so that they uniquely learn
Absolutely.
and they can be on par without the constant struggle. And then
Absolutely.
perhaps kids giving up or, going into other directions because they're perennially frustrated because they are struggling so bad.
Mhm, mhm. And I don't think that parents understand and recognize that. I think a lot of parents are so quick to just say no. You'll do better when they don't understand the impact that that's having on their child. For
Mhm,
your child to be in a space with other peers who aren't struggling, that destroys their confidence, that destroys their self esteem. To know, like, why am I not as smart as these people? Why am I not getting good grades? Why am I not passing? Why do people call me dumb? Or, I'm going to be teased for not being able to catch on to this as quickly. Like, you're honestly, you're just like your child. Your child is going to be faced with those things because children and adolescents, their most important relationship are always the peers.
mhm,
Their peers is
absolutely.
the most important relationship. So if
And
they
it's
don't
getting
feel
younger and younger.
exactly. So if they don't feel like they're equal to their peers, they're already going to feel some self-defeating thoughts, and it's a struggle for them.
Mhm. Mm. And so I'll delve into questions with you related to the therapy process itself. But one question as a follow-up with that is, well, what do you do with the youth themselves who need those services and they feel like it is putting a spotlight on them, or their friends or classmates are like, well, why do you get to leave at the classroom, or why does we just took the test, but you don't have to turn your test in until tomorrow or next week. Like, do you work with any teens or youth that
Mhm,
really are talking about, actually don't want these things even if they need them because they feel like it ostracizes them or makes them stand out as different?
mhm. So, I'm very big on just normalizing these things, and I think that once you get to the child and you start to explain to them how it works and you normalize it, they start to accept it more, especially if they have supportive people around them, whether it's parents, teachers, some friends. If they already have a friend group, just having that support is very important. In addition to that, I think a good thing about this now, it's so many things going on with these younger generations now, but a good thing about this younger generation is that they are very outspoken. And they are very much independent little fireballs that are just like not really conforming to social norms like older generations, my generation, and up used to do. So I think that that's a positive for them. So I think now the teenagers we have now are more accepting of it as well, and their peers are more supportive.
Mhm.
So in rare occasions, rare instances, they're not supportive, but most times the teenagers now are actually very supportive of it. Like, and I support you getting extra help.
Mhm.
This is good for you. We want you to also be successful.
Mhm.
So yeah, and then I think that goes into also explaining healthy versus unhealthy relationships and friendships as well, along the way. So it's all a learning process. But I do think that children and adolescents and teenagers specifically are more receptive to it now than they used to be.
Very good. And that's helpful. And that for some reason, and this is showing my age when you were saying about how things have changed. I started hearing the theme song from A Different World from back in the day. And it really is a
Mhm.
different world from where we
It
came from
is.
and the things that were the norms for our lives and our peer circles and how far things have advanced
Mhm.
nowadays. And so then if we pivot into there's been a need identified and you have been engaged to work with a child. What When they enter into therapy with you, can you explain a little bit about some of the approaches you might use to interact with them? Basically, what would a typical session be like? And perhaps it's different, obviously, with the initial ice breaking ones
Mhm.
as compared to the ongoing therapy.
Right. So it definitely depends on age. I would say again with my younger children, I'd say about 11 to 12 and under. We do a lot of play therapy. Right now, I do a lot of somatic trauma focused therapy at my practice. Specifically, it's a somatic and trauma focused practice. So we do a lot of somatic things, which is basically allowing them to do that mind body connection, right?
Mhm.
So with younger children, that may look like us using sensory items to interact with each other. It may be drawing, painting, coloring, molding with slime and Play Doh. We have a lot of sensory things like fur rugs and teddy bears with different textures. We have sand hourglasses that we utilize as well. So we have a lot of different interactive things. We have games, we have therapy games and then regular games as well that we can bring a therapy approach into a regular game as well, depending on their preference. So those younger people, we're definitely doing a lot of that play therapy mixed in with the regular therapy because once you get a child playing and they're comfortable, they'll just talk mindlessly about everything. They'll just start, oh yeah, I'm getting bullied for this, or my mom stresses me out because she's yelling about this, or I'm really sad actually because my parents divorced. So they'll just start talking without even actually knowing that they're talking about things and knowing that it's therapy. So, as a therapist, you're just kind of documenting like, oh, okay, so let's work on this, or tell me your emotions. Like I have an emotion card board where they can circle how they feel, with a dry eraser marker and circle all the faces you felt, this past
Mm.
week. And then we can talk about them individually. Or if they like to draw, I'll have them keep drawing picture diaries instead of, journaling. So as long as it's age appropriate. With my teenagers and adolescents, I have teenage and adolescent based games as well. So there are therapy games that ask different questions and then we'll play as well. So I'm like, okay, you take a turn. We're going to take turns picking cards and then the cards may have random subjects on them from, bullying to things teens experience. What things might you want to change in the world? If you could wake up tomorrow and have a different life, what would it look like? So it doesn't necessarily feel like therapy, especially if you're engaging and also answering the questions. They feel more comfortable just opening up and just talking. And so that's how you build that strong rapport. And when you have that rapport, they'll pretty much just open up about everything. And as long as
Mhm.
you're building that trust in relationship, something that I really cannot stress enough with all of my children, um, as long as they're at the age where they can understand, and I would say maybe 6, 7 and up, depending on maturity level. But I make sure on that very first initial session that the parents are also present, and I stress to the parents, listen, your child is my client, right? I am not going to tell you anything that we talk about unless it's a life or death, they want to harm themselves or others situation or something that's significantly severe, or either they ask me to talk to you specifically about something. And then even then, I'll give them the option to either be present or not present. And then I also do not want you to talk to them about it if they say they don't want to talk about it when they get home. If they
Mhm.
only want to talk to you about this particular subject in therapy, that's where you need to leave it at. So I let them know, don't ask me how things are going. You can ask your child. If they say good, bad, you just take what you can get. But I don't let them email me, hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do that? You can absolutely give me input and say, hey, they had a rough week last week. A, B, and C happened. Oh, thank you for letting me know. But I let them know not to come to me asking, hey, can you tell me about this? Or can you tell me what they said? No, your child is a client. If I don't have this safe, trusting relationship where they can trust
They're not gonna
me, they're
yeah.
not going to open up. So you need to respect that.
And I'm assuming as I think about, again, some of the parents from previous generations and even some of us now, to be honest, who were raised by those folks in previous generations, do they accept the "You want me to work and support your child. I'm gonna do this, and again, you will be informed if there's something that is mission critical that you need to know." Do the majority of parents, do you get any pushback, or are they like, "You
Definitely
got
get
it?"
some pushback sometimes. And what I'll do is
Okay.
I'll recommend them to go to therapy. I say, listen, you have a child who's struggling with gender identity, or you have a child that's struggling with an intellectual or physical disability. You need to seek therapy to learn how to
Mhm,
support your child with
mhm,
this going on. That's not a them issue and it's not a me issue, it's a you issue. So you need to seek your own therapy to deal with what your child has going on so you can learn how to navigate that as a parent. My job
mhm.
is to navigate this with the client and teach them how to navigate their own issues. But if you have an issue with what they have going on, that's a you thing. You need to seek therapy for that.
Now, are there any times where you do the bridge with the family therapy so that at least the parent can identify some of their shortcomings? Because it is one of those things, if you're having protected conversations with the kids and they're like, mom or daddy's popping off, they're not abusing me, but they're so stressed and angry that they're doing this, that sometimes people don't know what they're doing or that the things that they're doing are not appropriate
Right, right.
as ways. And so but and if they're not told in some way, and again, don't go and immediately seek that therapy for themselves, is there that way for you to have that family conversation so that they at least understand
Mhm,
this is protected over here, but this is that wonderful area that you need to know about because it's hopefully going to improve how you
mhm.
interact.
Absolutely. So that would be the case when I say, if they say, "Hey, I want to talk to my parent about this," or "I want you to talk to my parent about this," and I give them the option to be either present or not present, it's usually things like that. Like, "Hey, I feel like my mom yells a lot, or she makes me anxious when she's yelling, or I don't like that my mom invades my privacy or goes through my phone, or I don't like A, B, and C." So then I'll say, okay. I'll say, I'll give them, depending on the age, I'll give them advice of how to handle it, and we'll talk about and role play communication, effective communication with your parent, what that looks like. We'll identify ways that are the least intrusive to communicate, right? So sometimes I use um, communication binders with a family. So I may say, hey, you only communicate through this binder because this is a safe way for your child to communicate and feel heard without it being so intrusive where it causes them to
Mhm.
isolate and shut down and they're not telling you anything. Or I'll
Yeah.
have them get a communication jar and put, a pen and some sticky notes next to it and say, hey, when things come up, you know, write it down, put it in a sticky, put it in a jar, and you guys pick 1 or 2 days out of the week where you sit down as a family at the table and you
Mm.
talk about those things. So we have that, and I even have one with pictures. I'll say get a dry erase board, draw, columns and rows, put people's names, and then you guys can draw a face. It could be a happy face, a sad face, angry face, or whatever. And then under it, you can do a check that I want to talk about it, or an X, I don't want to talk about it, just to
Mhm.
kind of keep you in the loop. Like, hey, okay, you had a rough day at school, you're angry, but there's an X, you don't want to talk about it. So just so I'll know how to react and respond
Mhm.
and support you as my child. Like, okay, you had a rough day and you don't want to talk about it. How can I support you? Do you need extra
Mhm.
hugs? Do you need, extra time in your room? Do you want me to make your favorite meal or get you ice cream? Just be supportive in the way that they need you to be supportive, and not try
Mhm.
and push the way that you want to be supportive onto them.
Yeah.
Um, so that's a good way to communicate as well.
Thank you. And I think that's the hardest part for us as parents is trying to step into and fill those shoes of their kids and to understand that you meet them where they are and you
Mhm,
communicate in the language or the way that makes sense to them versus saying, well, I'm the parent. And at some point, I've got to be the disciplinarian or I've got to be, quote unquote, the tough, tough guy, tough girl, and just
mhm,
say you got to get over it. And so I think that's the struggle for some of us is like, how much are we willing or able to pause in that moment to be receptive to the child? And if they literally say, "I do not want to talk about it," don't keep teasing around the edges of, "Well,
mhm,
okay, you don't want to talk about that right now. Well, tell me something else." And they're just like, "But I just said I don't want to talk about it."
mhm.
And so,
Yes.
um, I think that that's a struggle for many of us who are doing active parenting. Is life is happening so fast and so hard around us that
Mhm.
being attentive and taking the cues of our kids and being able to see them eye to eye and to ask, listen,
Right. Right.
and do is really
Mhm.
hard.
Mhm. Being aware of those generational changes, like I said, like a lot of us are, older adults growing up, we didn't really have a say. It was just like whatever we say goes. You don't talk back. You just say yes, ma'am, keep it moving.
Mhm,
You disciplined. Versus now, you can't necessarily treat the children these days like that because these children are different. One, they're in a different generation. Two, they're having different experiences. Three, they're exposed to different things. And it's a life or death thing. Honestly, like the suicide rate for children is significantly higher now than it was then, right? So I tell my parents, like, it's okay to admit that you're wrong as a parent. It's okay to apologize to your child. You're just because you're an adult and you're older does not mean that you're right. You
Mhm,
may not be an
mhm,
expert on this child's life in particular, even though it's your child. You don't know what they're going through.
yeah,
So they're experiencing things that you don't have access to. You can't
mhm,
be with them 24/7 their entire life. It's impossible.
mhm,
And you can't dictate how they experience and how they feel and the emotions that are attached to things that they experience, even if you do witness them.
mm,
So I tell my parents just to be mindful of that and to make sure that they understand that they're not always right. And it
yeah,
is okay to apologize as a parent and say, hey, I apologize. I totally screwed that up.
mhm,
I know that I said X, Y, and Z early, or I was very resistant to what you were trying to say, and I understand and recognize now that I was wrong. How can I be
that's
more
powerful.
supportive? Yeah, how can I be more supportive going forward? Or, is there anything I can do to let you know that you can trust me? Right. Um,
Mhm,
because at the end of the day, and this is a very, very drastic example, but I've had to tell a parent this before, like, do you want a dead child or do you want your child to be alive and able to make it through this experience?
mhm, mhm,
It's
and
not
also the
always.
flip side. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, and the flip side is that even a child who's not harming themselves, we now know all of the things that happen in schools when children outwardly take their anger on classmates,
Absolutely.
teachers, in schools and other settings. And so it is very real that they may internalize it and do the self-harm that you said, or they may be the kids as if they can find the combination lock or no lock on their parents', closet
Absolutely.
and grab a weapon. And so I think it is something that never really existed for us. And so the notion of how much times have changed um is still an adjustment and staggering for a lot of us who really are taking on the ways that we were raised in our generation stuff. And it just literally is not at all like that.
Not the same. Yeah, it's nowhere near the same, honestly.
Hmm.
It's a lot. It's a lot. We didn't, as children, we didn't have school shootings, and we didn't have
No.
access to guns. And more importantly, if it did happen, we didn't have access to it on our devices. We didn't have cell phones. But oh, look what just happened.
Hmm.
So we didn't have access to suicide pacts and things like that on social media because we didn't have social media.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, it's a different world, and I think people struggle with adjusting and understanding that you can't possibly raise your children the same way you were raised because it really is a completely different time.
Mhm. And if so, you're going to do them a disservice because you're parenting them in a very stale, archaic way that
Mhm,
does not resonate with them. And they're likely going to give you more pushback, more conflict because you're trying to do that do as I say, not as I do thing.
mhm.
Children are supposed to be seen and not heard, and all that stuff that we dealt with back in the day with older relatives and parents. Um, and so as I think about, again, the changes in time, um, as we had teased a little bit earlier in the conversation, often in our community, there has been a little bit of reluctance in terms of centering our thoughts around the need for mental and behavioral health. Are you seeing any changes in recent years or in your practice where a lot more Black families are engaging in recognizing the need for this sort of care and actually seeking it out?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would say George Floyd was a big turning point um in my own personal experience and practice with my clients. I would say prior to the George Floyd incident, maybe about 90% of my caseload was white, honestly. Whereas now it's the other way around. It's about 85, 90% black. And then we have about, 10, 15% white and or, other races. So it's changed significantly. There are so many more black people seeking therapy. And I don't think that people fully understood the impact that those things like George Floyd had and all these other black people that are being killed by police and things like that has on society, like for me it honestly didn't really resonate with me until, I was teaching my daughter to drive years ago. And while we were driving, a police car came behind us and she started like panicking. I mean, she
Mhm.
was visibly anxious. She was shaking, she couldn't focus. She wasn't looking, like she was, gearing off the road. And I'm like, what is going on? Like, stop the car. Where
Yeah,
are
because
you?
he's gonna pull us in a
Like,
minute anyway
right
because of what's going
in
on.
the ditch pretty much. And I'm like, what's going on? Why did you do this? She's like, there's a police behind us.
You're
And I'm
like,
like,
"Okay."
you're not doing anything wrong. Like, you should be driving. You have your learner's permit. You're learning to drive. I'm in the car with you. What is going on in your mind? What's going on in your head? And she's like, I just don't trust them. She said, I don't trust them. They could shoot us. She said, they don't have to know us. They don't need a reason. They
Mm,
could come up to us and shoot us. And, it really resonated with me then that I know that this stuff affects us as adults. Like, you see it, you understand it, but what I didn't realize is that our children also understand it, and it's scary for them.
yeah,
It's scary. It's a real thing. So that's secondary trauma. That's very traumatic, and I don't think that people understand or recognize that as trauma. Your
yeah.
children have access to these things that they're seeing online, and that's secondary trauma.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm,
so it's heavy stuff. So Black people are definitely starting to come to therapy now. I would say that they're still getting some generational pushback, of course. Their grandparents and some people in their family, they don't agree with it. They think that they should turn to religion. They think that they should keep things in the family. And not only with Black people, with white people as well, other races, I would say there's that generational difference. Like I had a client who was in her late 30s, early 40s, who came to therapy specifically because her parents are racist. They do not do Black people at all. They don't like them. They don't want to deal with them. They call them out of their names. They talk about the KKK rallies, and she's in the middle because her teenage children are dating outside of their race. Her son was dating a Black girl, and she's like, I
mhm,
don't have a problem with Black people, but my my parents and my children do not get along. They don't share the same views. My children refuses to speak to my parents and vice versa. And I'm stuck in the middle trying to bridge this gap
mhm,
that
mhm,
that people don't realize exists.
mm. Wow.
So that's also pretty powerful. So we have that whole gap of people that also need to come to therapy to figure out how to navigate my parents who are racist, and my children
Mhm,
who are dating outside of their race and are like, what is wrong with you? People are people. I want to date who I want to date.
yep.
So there's that middle group of people who don't know how to navigate and blend and bridge that gap between generations.
Mm,
Same
mm,
thing with Black families. Honestly, same thing with
mhm,
Black families. If you think about, let's say my grandparents who picked cotton for a living, right? And then my children also who they'll date whoever they like. I don't care. I don't care who you date. I don't care. But, you have grandparents who are like, we picked cotton. Why are you bringing home white people? Like, who
mhm, mhm,
what's up with that? Like, that's not acceptable. Like, we don't want to, they giving you
mm.
the whole we're not doing that thing, right? So there's just that generational gap that also needs to be addressed in therapy, because that's something that you don't necessarily know how to navigate because people aren't talking about that gap.
They're not. Or they're like, with society, you have to get over it. And for some people, this is literally how they were raised and everything that was in their environment. So just telling someone to get over it and to join, this new century that we find ourselves in, it's easier said than done. And there are people that you have to peel it away and you assume, well, if you love me or you love your grandkids, you're going to have to figure out how to do it. And it's not honestly fair.
Hmm.
Yes, we can expect it, but that's gonna take a seismic shift that a lot of people just aren't able to do
Hmm.
without some form of assistance.
Right, especially teenagers now with the gender identity and um LGBTQIA community in general. We have a lot of parents who are like, no, this is no, we're
Mhm,
not doing this. You're not trans. You need to identify as what's on your birth certificate. What is non-binary? They don't know what these alphabets means. They don't know what it stands for. They don't know how to interact, or and they're shutting their children out. They're like, or this is just a phase. We're not entertaining this,
Mhm.
or do what you want to do outside of my house. And they're not understanding and realizing the stress that that's causing on these children, these teenagers, these adolescents.
Mm.
They don't understand the impact it has on them because it is their identity. And regardless
Mhm.
of what we believe or what we were raised on, it's a noun thing. It's happening. It doesn't have
Mhm.
anything to do with us. It's happening.
Mhm.
So we need to be able to support them regardless. Because if you're not supporting them, what happens if they do commit suicide because they don't have support, which has happened quite a bit.
Mm.
I know I've had two teenagers specifically who suicide because of that. Their families wouldn't accept them. So, it's heavy stuff that these teenagers, adolescents, children in general are going through, regardless of race.
Yeah.
It's just a lot.
And I
So
think we romanticize a lot of this stuff. We see, TV shows where, well, if you're different, you can go find your community. You don't need to bring that stuff to us. But the reality is all of the things that from leaving your house to supposedly finding that community that your child has to navigate. The
mhm.
loss of love and support, the loss of perhaps income, a roof over their head when they start to have to get into sex work or, any types of drugs, because at some point you're being in a more vulnerable environment. And so parents don't recognize that it's almost like you're letting your child go because they're not supporting who they are and they can't be their full authentic self with you. They may seek it out there, but in finding that, there are going to be predators and other people that are like, "Oh, vulnerable, you don't
Mhm.
have your people.
Exactly.
Let's." Yeah.
I'll take you. I'll accept you. And
Yeah.
then you're subjecting them to all types of abuse, sex
Mhm.
trafficking. It is so much that you see on this other end here, that people just don't understand. It's heartbreaking, but it definitely fuels that passion that you have to do what you do. It's
Mhm.
definitely things that keep me going. Just that awareness piece and that psycho education and letting people know, like, hey, this is going on. This
Mhm.
is how you can support them, or at least help them find support, find you some support to know how to support. Um, yeah, yeah. But I'm very, very happy that Black people are finally starting to come to therapy, regardless of the kickback they're getting from their families.
Mhm.
There is
Um,
that.
y Yeah, and I know we've talked about, the racial ethnic differences. If you can say a little bit about the differences in gender, like if you're dealing with boys versus girls, are you approaching that differently? Are the needs and the ways, you engage, does it vary according to whether, there are a boy or girl?
Um, I would say sometimes it does, but not all the time. It really is a case by case basis because I would say on a broad spectrum, most teenage boys experience some of the same things, and most teenage girls experience some of the same things. I'd say historically, women, females, girls are more emotion minded than boys typically are. Um, but that's not always the case because we get boys all the time who are emotional, and then they're stigmatized for being emotional or
Mhm,
showing emotion.
mhm,
So it's like I can't show emotion, but I'm feeling emotional. I
mhm,
have an emotion. An emotional person, so they're kind of shunned and ostracized and isolated because they want to be showing their emotions, or they feel heavily. Whereas it's like, oh no, that's girls. You don't need to do that. Um,
mhm,
but there are a lot of bridges that connect these boys and
mhm,
girls, like sports for one. Sports, dance, football, soccer, baseball, basketball, sports in general, gymnastics. Um, that bridges that eating disorder. Yeah, boy and girl.
mhm,
You know, um, Eating disorders is the number. It's the most deadly mental illness.
mhm.
So I think
And
that parents overlook it a lot. And me, since I specialize in it as well, I don't think people realize the extent that these children and I guess internalize these sports they're putting them in. A
Mhm.
lot of people are like, "Oh no, you keep your kids busy, put them in 10,000 sports so they're always busy." But at the same time, when you're in sports, it builds that competitive mentality. So if it's
Mhm.
like, I'm not the best, I'm not the fastest, I'm not the strongest, I'm not, you know, the best at this. I need to do something so I'm the best.
Mhm.
So that's where these eating disorders come in. And it starts
Yep.
very subtle, really small. It's like, oh, I'm gonna skip a meal. I need to drop a couple pounds for wrestling, or I need to run faster in the game today, so I'm not gonna eat today.
Mhm.
And you see a lot of people dying from these things now too.
Mhm.
So people are passing out on fields where people are getting heart problems. Eating disorders cause so many things, and eating disorders are like addiction in terms of they never go away. They have these loud thoughts that are constantly telling them you're not good enough, you're fat, you're slow, you're whatever in the back of their mind, and it never goes away. It's like really, really loud. And then if you get the correct treatment, which is often you have to residential for it, and then long-term care, it's always there. It's a little lighter, it's not as loud, but always there. And I think people overlook that a lot, especially with sports. You're putting all this pressure on them, and you're taking the fun out of it, and it's become this competition where you're a lot of times living through them and pushing them, not understanding the pressures and the internal processes that they have go along with these sports and things like that. So
Mhm.
things like that doesn't matter gender. They both eating disorders. They both
Yeah.
feel that self-esteem piece. Um, and they may process it a little bit differently, but it to be the same thing, similar at least in a
Got
lot
it.
of ways.
And I think also, as you said, the acknowledgement that a lot of this is peer driven. It is if you're in sports, and like I said, you want to be the best, you don't want to be the worst player, and you got to cut weight, you're wrestling, and you got to do this or all these sorts of things where there are drastic things that are needed that I don't think parents recognize what goes into allowing them to feel like they can compete at that level or be in the shape that they need to be. And so there's that one thing in terms of the sports arena, but just globally, kids now have a phone, tablet, laptop in their faces. And so if they are not experiencing from the circle in front of them, they're seeing it in social media, on
Body.
IG, on all that stuff in the body image. And yes, curvy seems to be again, making a comeback if you say, or it's acceptable, but there's still it's a type of curvy. It's usually the type that is achieved with surgery that we as
Mhm,
adults know, like, oh, she looks like that because of BBLs, because of tummy tucks. And you're not thinking that a teenager is talking about a BBL or tummy tuck, but it's
mhm. Yeah,
unrealistic what they're seeing, and most bodies are not going to look like that without some manipulation. But there's that level of discernment that sometimes adults struggle with. So you can only imagine
mhm.
someone who's 13,
Yeah,
14, seeing
right.
that and thinking the Kim Kardashians of the world are real, or the
Yeah,
the Kylie Kardashian, like they are real people, but what you're seeing, the physical shell, has had a little bit of work.
yeah. Body image, and for boys as well. We get tons of boys. I get a lot of boys in therapy who have those same body images. So I don't have enough muscle, so I don't. That's why I'm wearing a hoodie. Some people say
Mhm.
that my arms aren't muscular, or I'm skinny, or I have skinny legs or skinny arms. So boys, they experience as well in a lot of ways, and that's not talked about enough. And I think the key difference between girls is that girls typically will at least have someone to vent to, or
Mhm.
they have friends who feel the same way. Whereas boys, their conversations they're never more than this level. They're not talking about the heavy stuff like, oh man, I can't. I'm not wearing I don't want to show my arms. My arms aren't muscular enough. They're not having those
Mhm.
conversations. They're talking about
Mhm.
things that they're interested in, sports, girls, or boys, or whatever. So their conversations aren't really, deeper than surface level.
Mm.
So,
Okay. And I know we're coming up on the hour, and so I do want to bring this to a conclusion. But I think if there are any takeaway points from all the things we've covered in helping our parents to think about what their children need, are there any kind of lasting thoughts that you would have to say, all right, well, if you want to be in tune to your kids, and again, this different world that we find ourselves in, well, all of the
Mhm.
different influences that affect the kids, what are some of those takeaways that you would have?
One, I would say listen, listen to your children, pay attention to their behaviors, their personalities, their friend groups are very important. Pay attention to those things. To remember that you're not always right. Don't be afraid to apologize. And then, most importantly, always ask them how you can be supportive, and don't just assume, you doing whatever means that you're supporting them, because support is subjective and people need different types of support and different levels of support. And, also don't be afraid to seek support for you to support your child. That's super important. I think people leave that out. That family dynamic is very important in allowing your children to be in the best mental space it can be.
Mhm. Thank you. That is super helpful. And I think just my takeaway as well with what you just said is that a lot of us either are not focusing at all on the mental behavioral health care of any one of us, our families, our spouses, our mates, ourselves. And so it's really difficult. But sometimes we also do partial work where if you're in therapy and you're going to your therapist weekly, but literally everybody that's around you is just kind of
Right.
left to their own devices. There are broken things there. You may be healing and your presentation may change a little bit. And so that person's like, whoa, 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 what's going on? The
Mhm.
OU, and how do I deal with that? And not
Mhm.
realizing that they're integral pieces that everyone needs to talk to someone and kind of work through how they want to communicate and engage with people. And so again, for those of you who are listening in, this is an important area for all of us. Just like you want to run to the gym or, going to grab that bag salad from the grocery store, it,
Oh, yeah.
your inner, your mind, all of those things are just as powerful and sometimes will manifest in the physical things because you're not attending to it. And so don't build up one area and completely neglect the other, and don't think that sometimes you can't afford it, because if you don't even try, and like you said in the beginning, some of those resources of putting that stuff in there and then seeking them out, you'd be really surprised with people who will work with you, if there's a genuine need.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
um, well,
Okay.
this has been a lovely conversation as always. If someone wanted to reach out to you, are you currently taking new clients or is there a wait list?
I do this. I would say I take a couple new ones every month or so. I will be opening up that wait list very shortly to take me people, since I'm moving some people to bi-weekly and every 3 weeks finally. So that's exciting. So occasionally I do have openings. If not, I have a whole team of amazing therapists that I work with um, in several different locations. So there's definitely a network. If you reach out and you need help and I can help, I'll definitely have some referrals for you as well.
And what's the name of your practice in case they wanted to check you out?
North Carolina Center for Resiliency. It's in Chapel Hill and Asheville. It's my main practice, and then I have a private practice as well called Chasing the Vision Counseling Services, which is
Awesome. And you cut off a little bit, but I will get the information from you and link it into the bio below in case anyone is interested. But again, thank you so much for your time, for your willingness to share on this topic and continue to expose our families to a new way of doing family business compared to what we've ever had.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks everyone for viewing. And if you have any comments, please put them down in the video and we'll follow up with any responses. Thank you.